Welcome back everybody to Tabletop Tactics. It's me, Mr. Beard, and here Mr. Chef. And today we bring you another State of Play video, and we're talking specifically today about the Maelstrom of War.
Yeah.
Yes! So recently in White Dwarf number 461, this one right here, it introduced to us a new version of the Maelstrom of War.
Yeah.
A new version.
Well, a beta version.
Yes. It is in beta form. It is a new set of rules that are designed to complement the normal core rule set / GT rule set of the game that we know and love, to bring a new way of playing.
Yeah.
It's very cool. We like new ways of playing. We like to be able to mix it up here and there. But the question on our lips,
yes.
My lips and yours,
Yes.
what's better, the new one or the old one? Now, we've always been big fans of Maelstrom.
Yeah, the Maelstrom was like, so, I mean, yeah, I'm sure there's some of you already typing now, it's like, but Maelstrom isn't balanced. You're correct.
Yeah, it's not balanced.
It's not balanced. It was never balanced, but
It's a different way of
it's
playing.
a different way of playing. If you want like that, you know, sort of completely, you know, everything's set in stone, that's what your GT mission's for, all right? But if you want that bit of variety, and you've got open war as well, this is just another way of adding a bit of spice to the game. Now, with regards to sort of the new and the old version, we've actually, at time of releasing this, I think yesterday, will be a game that we played using the old version. Fantastic game, really good game. Go and watch it because there may be spoilers for that game in here because we're going to use that as a reference point.
Yep.
Vice versa, that it doesn't even apply here. But either way, we've also done a new one now. Spider and Bone did one as well,
yep.
A few weeks back, and again, sort of at time of release, I think one's just gone out with us playing the new version. Again, another really great game.
Yeah.
Again, spoilers are probably going to be in this video, so if you've not watched that game yet, go and watch those games. One, because they're just really good games in our opinion, and secondly because, like I say, a lot of the stuff that we're going to talk about here is going to use them as a reference point. So having played some now, we've got a sort of a comparison point between the old and the new. However, as we say, the new one is in a beta format.
Yes.
So there's still tweaks to happen. So what's the plan for this video then, Beard? Because this is kind of your brainchild here.
So essentially we're going to go through, for anyone that hasn't played Maelstrom before, it's just going to be a little run through of what the game is about. And we're also going to talk about the pros and cons for each of the versions. And ultimately we're going to come up with a our favourite between the two of them, essentially. Yeah. When Games Workshop released this rule set in White Dwarf, they basically put a disclaimer in there saying, A, it's a beta and we're seeking feedback. If the rule set is liked by the community, then they'll figure out how to make it into a mission pack in the future. The second option is that they'll take the feedback on board, do some tweaks, and then release something else based on the feedback. And the third version is if it's mixed feedback, they're going to go back to the drawing board, come up with something new, or revert back to the old version. Yeah. So we're basically, based on the games that we've played, we're going to sort of summarize our thoughts, what's good about the new one, what's good about the old one, what we think really should be put forward into 9th edition, and then invite you guys as well just to sort of create some feedback.
Yeah.
And then the idea here is that we put all of it back to Games Workshop so they can create what we want.
Yeah, pretty
essentially.
Much. Yeah.
So with the new version, we've said it a couple times already, it is a beta version, so these rules are subject to change and feedback, but essentially it's designed to complement the existing rule set for 9th edition. Yes. It's not replacing anything, it's just a different way of playing. So essentially, you have 6 missions, you have 4 stratagems that you can use specifically for Maelstrom, then you have 6 tables worth of secondary objectives. Yeah. And there's some new deployment maps as well. Have I said that already?
No. So yeah, so there's 3 deployment maps. Yes. Like they're all very similar. In fact, they're pretty much identical to some of the main mission ones. Yeah. We generally refer to them as Dawn of War. So that's your sort of your long edge deployment, Hammer and Anvil, which is your short edge deployment, and then Search and Destroy, which is your table quarters like that. So I mean those are names that haven't changed. And as you say, it's very complementary to the existing 9th rule set because you know, it's got, here's your 2-page mission brief in the exact order that you do things. You know, sort of when you declare reserves and transports, you roll off attacker, defender, deployment, all that sort of stuff. And then each of your 6 main missions, so have like their own little twists, as it were, to sort of either give you additional victory points or ways to generate additional Maelstrom objectives. And then your stratagems you can use again to sort of change it up. So you've got a fair bit of flexibility within your mission, and that's one of the things that I do like. I know I'm probably skipping ahead here, but that's one of the things that I really like about Maelstrom is the flexibility that you get and the way that you have to react to the different missions rather than, I know that that's my primary, these are my secondaries, that's my game plan, done.
Yeah.
But I'm jumping ahead a little bit. But that sort of element is still, that's in there with those missions already off the bat.
Yeah.
So you've definitely got a lot of ways to do stuff. And your game setup is normal, pretty much to a normal game of 9th edition. There's a few differences based on the FAQ. So now when you win the roll-off for first turn, you choose whether you go first or second.
Yeah, that is a bit odd. Again, it's a beta.
It's a beta, and chances are it's because that went to print long before the FAQ was released.
I imagine so. Yeah.
I mean, because printing generally takes anywhere between 3 to 6 months. And, you know, I think that's a fairly accepted thing with White Dwarf, that they're usually working about 3 to 6 months ahead. So, yeah, they would have received that from, like, the rules team back in maybe September for this, because this one was was this the February or the March?
I think it was February.
Yeah, so they probably would have received that in September to go to print, at which point they're then working on the FAQ for the other stuff. So, but again, you know, that it doesn't really make a difference because you can always just play it with the new GT format of going, I won the roll-off, so I have to go first, I think. Yeah. And again, that's probably something that you will see change when it comes to completion anyway.
Yeah.
But otherwise, with the format, the bulk of it is in the missions and the tables of missions that you have.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, for anyone that has played Ninth already, there's not like a huge learning curve for this. In terms of setting the game up, that, like you've already said, that's going to be very, very familiar for everyone. The main differences are that you'll have your mission parameters, which will tell you how many secondary objectives that you can choose in a game. And then when you get towards the end of the setup, you'll then pick your secondary objectives that you can then use in terms of the tables.
Yeah, like your mission categories.
Yeah.
And then essentially in every game, or in every mission, barring one, you have to roll a D3 to select which of the 3 tables that you've picked, and then a further D6 to pick which one of the ones that you've got within that table. So you could, in theory, now, and then obviously if there's things that are impossible to achieve because you can't, you know, I rolled kill a Psyker and I'm playing Tau. I can't kill a Psyker, so I get to pick one. If you generate one that you've already got for that turn, you roll again. But you do it every turn.
Yeah.
And that is a very, very key difference between the new version and the old version, is you have to change your objectives every turn.
Yeah.
Now, there is a stratagem that allows you to keep hold of one, but we'll come back to that.
Yeah. So this may sound a bit cumbersome and confusing. Once you have the White Dwarf and the missions in front of you, it's actually quite straightforward.
It's not that difficult.
Yeah.
If you're playing. Now for us, it takes a long time, and we did touch on this in both of the games that we've played, both the game that we played and the game that Lawrence and Ben played, was because we've got all this other stuff in the background going on, it actually takes a long time for us. It's quite convoluted, and obviously we want to impart all the information over to you guys, you know, what objectives they are, whereas with the sort of your normal GT missions, it's already there. It's ready to go. You know what it is. You don't have to change anything other than just sort of what happens throughout the game. So that is obviously that's something for us, but that doesn't impact the overall game itself. I think if you were just sort of playing a normal game without holding a camera, you'd actually, you know, it sounds, and I remember reading it and I was like, wow, there's a lot going on. But actually, yeah, I agree. It's not that convoluted once you've sort of done it and you just kind of, the ball gets rolling.
Yeah, and once you've played a couple of games, then it will be second nature.
Exactly
the same way that when 9th edition came around the first time, it was a little bit intimidating, but once you give it a go and you have a few games under your belt, it's really straightforward.
Yeah.
Now, in terms of the old version of Maelstrom, not all of you may have played that before. So it came out in 8th edition. It was part of the most recent version of the old Maelstrom is Schemes of War.
Yeah.
And that came out in chapter approved 2019.
Yeah, and Schemes of War is the one that we're going to refer to because that, in our opinion, was the best and the most refined version of Maelstrom. Because it was in the original rulebook, and it was a thing in 7th edition as well, Maelstrom of War. And it used to be either you randomly draw from a full 36 deck of cards, or you rolled like essentially it was a D66. So you'd roll similar to how for those of you that sort of do GT missions, you know how you roll for is it a 1 or a 2 or a 3, and then you further D3. So rather than a D33, it's a D66. You'd go right a 1, and then I rolled a 5. So I would look for objective number 15 on a table. The Schemes of War, however, rather than sort of doing it completely random from a full set of 36, asked you to create a deck.
Yes.
And you would make a deck, a minimum size deck of 18 cards. You could have more if you wanted, but you had to have at least 18. Now, bearing in mind that in 8th edition, you had random game length. So you could go to game turn 6. You could go to game turn 7. This was all on a roll of a dice. So you could, in theory, play, oh yeah, I'll have 18 cards.
Yeah.
3 for each turn, because that's generally how you would draw the cards. Again, it would depend on the mission. There were occasionally little mission objectives that would let you have 4 cards in play. But for the most part, you had your deck of 18 to however many cards you wanted. You would have a hand of 5, and then you would put up to 3 in play. But you could keep them between rounds. So let's say you had a card that you were pretty confident you weren't going to get this turn, but you would next turn. You could kind of play ahead in a way. But you could also find yourself in circumstances where you go, oh, we're on turn 7 and I've already done all my victory points.
Yeah.
I can't score anything this turn.
Yeah.
It didn't happen often, but it was something. So that deck building element, and because you got to choose, it was the most refined version, because there were issues with the older version when you'd go, okay, what card do I draw? Cast a Psychic Power. That's great for my Necrons.
Yeah. Yeah, the Schemes of War introduced a really refined version of Maelstrom, and it's one that I think a lot of people really enjoyed. It got rid of some of the issues like you just explained, but also adding that deck building element just created a whole new
metagame, if you were.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. You can base it on the sort of list that you're running. You can base it around your faction. It gives a lot more flavor, I feel, and it does make the game more exciting because it feels like these are missions for your army. And it also meant that you can more than likely achieve all of the objectives that you're choosing because you've picked them based on your army and what you're able to do.
Yeah.
And I think adding in the deck building element was also great because there's plenty of games out there, card-based games, which are very popular for a very good reason, and it just added this extra bit into the game that we already love. So that was the best version of Maelstrom, I think.
Yeah, I agree. And the thing is as well, it wasn't actually that dissimilar to your secondary objectives now, in that it wasn't, you need to create a deck of 18 to however many cards and have it on your army list.
Yeah.
You know, before you went down to your store and play a game, it's like, oh, do you want to play Maelstrom? Going, yeah, we'll play Maelstrom. Going, right, well, I've already got my deck. You would see your opponent's list beforehand. So no different to picking your secondaries. You go, right, well, my opponent doesn't have anything with fly, so I won't take this objective to kill something with fly, for example. I don't have much in the way of melee in my army, so why would I take the kill stuff in melee? My army's not actually that fast, so I probably won't take the secure that objective over there type one that's in their zone or whatever. You know, so you had the flexibility to not only build the deck, build it to your opponent's weaknesses, build it to your army strengths, but it still had a random element to it because it's a deck build. But any good deck building game, and anyone that plays deck building games and trading card based games, however you want to call them, they will tell you the importance of, yes, you're building your deck, but that is in a way similar to army list building now. You have to know what's in your army to know its strengths and weaknesses. Vice versa, if you've got your deck of cards and you go, right, well, I know that I've not drawn this mission yet, but I know it's in there somewhere, and it's turn 3. So I know I've only got a few more turns, but if I get it, great. That could twist it for me. If I don't get it, I could be in trouble. So what can I do to try and get that out? Now, similar to the new version or the beta version, you rolled for your deployment. You've got your 6 different missions, each with their own little twist to it. We're not going to go through every single one of those, but suffice it to say, it's very similar to the current version. There was ways to manipulate your hand, manipulate the cards that you have in play. One of my favorite aspects of it is the mystery card, because every time you put cards into play, you could hide one of them.
Yeah.
And this is one of the big advantages that I think it has, is that with the current version, they're always in play. They're always known to your opponent, so your opponent has ways to counter. That's not necessarily a bad thing.
No,
it's not necessarily a bad thing, because that's obviously a strategic aspect in and of itself. But hiding a card, you can bait your opponent. You can go like, oh, well, you don't know what my objective is. So like, oh, okay, like, do I have to anticipate it? Like, what is my opponent likely to do? You know, I've hidden a card with my Tau army. It's like, oh, could it be kill stuff with shooting? Could it be something else? And actually, it's hold that objective that you've decided to abandon, and I go, haha, I've like scored a point. So there was an aspect of unpredictability for both sides, whilst still needing you to rely on some strategic acumen of going, right, well, what can my opponent do? What can my opponent feasibly, sort of do with their army? What could I do to counter some potential threats? So that was a really, really good aspect of it. And there's nothing like that in the current version. It's all very open, which again, isn't a bad thing, because it allows your opponent to go, right, well, I know I can do X, Y, and Z to counter that. That one I'm going to have to let you do, because there's nothing I can do about it. But otherwise, they're similar in a way, but there are some key differences in the generation of those objectives.
Yeah, definitely. Well, let's go on to the next bit. We're going to sort of talk about the pros and cons for both before we sort of ultimately make our decision. So we'll be back in just a moment. So we'll start off with the pros for the new version of Maelstrom, and it's just that it fits in with the new set of rules. The old version is very much built for 8th edition. There's going to be some nuances there that don't necessarily fit, and you might have to house rule some stuff or kind of get rid of things that are designed to make the game work. This version is made for 9th edition.
Yes.
So it fits in very nicely into the normal way that you set up a game, you do your terrain and blah, 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 and then you also pick your mission parameters and your secondaries from there. So it very much fits into the flow that you expect at the moment with 9th edition. Aside from that, you've also then got a generic set of secondaries as well. So you don't have to worry about knowing what your other opponent may have. It's just the same for everyone. With old Maelstrom, each faction would have its own set of secondaries in there. So you might benefit from knowing what those are for the other factions. You might have an edge. With this version, you don't need to worry about that so much, because it's just the same for everybody. And finally, it's just new. There's some new stuff. There's new missions, there's new deployments, new stratagems. It just adds an extra element to the game that we know and love already. So it's just, in my opinion, it's a nice add-on, essentially.
Yeah, I agree. It's definitely something that is, it's not going to be suddenly something that you see in tournaments. They're not going to start going like, we're going to do Maelstrom. Like, it's not designed for that. It is designed to use 9th edition, obviously. It is designed to provide you with an alternative way to play. And there's nothing wrong with that in the slightest. Another sort of good side of it, I would say, is the fact that because a lot of the missions are based around that 9th almost sort of mindset, it's actually not too dissimilar to going from like a sort of a normal core mission, like match play mission, to Maelstrom. There's a lot of stuff around holding objectives. You've still got ways, there's still things, like your bring it down-esque objectives, your killer character-esque objective, things like that. But you also have more variety. So one of the good things for me with the Maelstrom is the fact that because you have access to 18 different secondaries, for want of a better word, over the course of a game. You may not get all of those, but what you might get is something that you go, right, well, okay, well, this gives me a new way that I can try out an army list. This gives me a way that I can potentially look at it and go, right, well, that works great for the GT missions. That works great for the match play missions. This might not actually work all that well in your Maelstrom mission. So it gives you an opportunity to try out new things and try out something that you might have kind of glossed over in the favor of, you know, pure efficiency. So I think me and Bone were talking about this, and it was sort of like some of the Death Guard lists that he comes up with are like really good, you know, for like your GT missions. Maelstrom wise, he was like, I don't know if they would do as well because there's not as much about holding objectives. Sure, I can take those categories, but I might not get those objectives on the dice roll, which means that actually the list that I've designed might not work. So you need to almost build not necessarily a more balanced list, but it's just a different mindset of building. Which is good for both sides of the coin, because it's great for Maelstrom because, as we say, it's something new that you can try. You can try out new things. It's also good for you GT because it allows you to pinpoint potential weaknesses in your list and go, right, okay, well, if I wasn't playing a GT, these weaknesses could potentially stand out. Is that going to have an impact in like a GT mission or a match play mission? Perhaps not, but it's always worth knowing the weaknesses of your army, especially if things change. Like we've already seen the GT missions change in some capacity in only sort of 6 months. So there is nothing to say that they won't change again. All of a sudden, the change that going second has had with the holding the objectives at the end of the turn rather than the beginning of the turn has caused some people to change their mindset in how they've done their objectives. Having a unit that can go, right, okay, well, last turn I can go onto that objective. That weakness wasn't there before because you didn't need to worry about it. So these are almost, in a way, I realise that there's a lot of stuff here that isn't going to apply to a GT, and if that's your only sort of way of playing, cool. But it's always useful to sort of look at other aspects and go, what if? And you never know what might come and might change with your GT missions anyway. So having an understanding of all facets of an army is not necessarily a bad thing. But yeah, otherwise I agree with everything you've said in terms of sort of overall nice, it's a nice new way to play. It's definitely designed with the 9th edition in mind, as well as it being sort of, quite, you don't have the outside focus of faction specific stuff. Yeah, like you say. Now that leads on to the old version in terms of pros, and one of that ones was you have your faction specific ones.
Yes, I feel like there was a lot more flavour with the old version. Each codex would have at the back where you have your generic Maelstrom cards. Each codex would have a set of the faction specific ones as well. So they were kind of similar to what you'd normally get anyway, just with slightly different wording or something that kind of more applies to that style of army. But it just felt like when you had your cards, they were for your army. Whereas with the new version, it's just a list of missions essentially, and you can kind of pick what's relevant at the time. But with the cards, it just felt like they were, you were the general commanding your army to do things that you would expect them to do. It was really, really cool. So I think that was a nice aspect, more from like a thematic or narrative point of view, but even when you were in the midst of a game, it felt like you were trying to do things that were based on your style of army. Yeah. Which again leads me back into the deck building element. It was just so good.
The deck building element was its own. So again, to use like the competitive sort of scene as its own thing, like as an example, the deck building element is just another layer of the external meta game. So for those of you that are really into your competitive play and you follow all of like the lists that win this event and the sort of the theory crafting over this and this guy who won this event with that list and it came really out of left field, like you love all that stuff, right? Building a deck is just another layer to that. Yeah. I think the other advantage that it had was the fact that you knew what was coming. You didn't know when it was coming, but you knew what was coming. Yeah. And that is a massive advantage over the current version because you effectively have 18 missions to choose from. You can change a category once per game with a CP and you can adjust which ones you get, but there are some issues with it, especially if there's one in a category that isn't going to work for you. Yeah. So to use our recent game that we had, 2 turns in a row, you drew Crushing Strike, which is kill 2 units with vehicles. Yeah. Your vehicles were equipped with multi-melters, and I had 1 tank. Yeah. So it was just like, right, well, this isn't going to happen. Yeah. You just wouldn't have put that in your deck. No. But because it was part of a category that, for the most part, that category was a good pick for you. You just got unlucky on the dice roll. There's less control over the new version. Yeah. Compared to the old version. And that's one of the advantages that it has over the new version in the fact that, you just wouldn't have chosen it. Like, and again, spoiler alert here, one of my last missions was to kill something with the highest power level on the board, which was Celestine. I never would have chosen that.
Yeah.
I never would have chosen, am I going to kill Celestine? What, the girl that runs...
gets back up again.
The girl that runs around with 6 wounds and can't be targeted and then gets back up on a 2+ with 6 wounds remaining? No! Why would I pick that? That'd be like turning around and going like, oh, okay, so here's your secondary objective. You've got orcs. But you have to kill Mortarion if Mortarion's on the board. Why would you ever want that?
Yeah.
Like, you just wouldn't pick it. So, and that is one of the issues and I get it's because they're in the different categories. And you are limited to the number of categories you can get, which, again, I suppose is a pro in and of itself for the current beta version of the Maelstrom, is that because you can't cherry pick what will work for your army, there will be times where you go, I'm not going to be able to do this, so I might not be able to, I'm going to have to think sort of outside the box or potentially set myself up for later turns. But because there's the chance that you get one of those, it makes it too random.
Yeah.
Now, I'm all for a bit of randomness. I'm all for a little bit of chaos magic going on. It's a dice game after all. But as any good competitive player will tell you, you mitigate that. So the previous ways of mitigating that for Space Marine was taking a chapter master, plonking him in the middle of your army and re-rolling everything. That was one way to mitigate everything, right? If you're an Elder player, you need this thing to die. How do you mitigate it? You put on Guide, you put on Doom. It's stuff like that, like I need to get that charge off. How do I mitigate that? I use warp time to ensure that I'm going to get that double move. I need to make sure that my stuff survives. How do I mitigate that? These are the sorts of things that you think of when you're at that army building stage. These are the sorts of things that you think of when you're at the deck building stage of the old Maelstrom. How do I mitigate not getting points? By picking stuff that I'm going to get points on, right? With the new version, you can't really get around rolling bad objectives, especially if you roll them twice in a row.
Yep. It's tough. It's one thing not being able to achieve it, but then when you get it twice in a row, it's a bit.
Yeah.
It's sort of disappointing for the game.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
Yeah. And I think there's another pro for the old version is because each objective is achievable once.
Yes.
Because they're achievable once you know you've done that, it opens up your game plan.
Yeah.
So it again allows you this almost like level of flexibility that you do not get in other versions of 40k in terms of your missions. Like now, obviously, again, once you get to a certain point on your secondaries, like let's say you're up against a guard army and you go, right, well, I'll bring it down. I can get 14 points on that. Once I've got my 14 points, I can do other stuff. Which is all good and well, but realistically, you're probably doing that over 2 to 3 turns anyway.
Yep.
There are things with the Maelstrom where you just go, right, okay, so one of them is overwhelming firepower. You get 1 point if you kill a unit in the shooting phase, or you get D3 victory points. We'll come on to that aspect in a moment if you kill 3 or more units. So let's say you draw that turn 2 and you do it. Great, I know that I've done that now, so now I can maybe focus on, I know that I've got some secure that objective or hold 3 objectives coming out, so maybe I can now, in the next turn, think about doing other things. It allows the games to not just be focused on, these are the 4 things that I have to do, that's what I'm gonna do. Which again, is perfectly fine if you're wanting that sort of completely, as balanced as 40k can be experience. If you're looking for a more variety, I think the Maelstrom that's definitely a big pro for the Maelstrom, and it more the old version than the current version.
Yeah,
I would say.
I think there's always been an argument that Maelstrom is far too random and it can't possibly be like a competitive based game. I would say actually that there's so many nuances to the deck building element that it can be a far more strategic based game than the core rule set, because you know what's coming up in terms of the deck that you've built. You have to think on the fly every single turn because you're not doing the same thing every single turn. You're not trying to get the primary or your 3 secondaries. You've got all this stuff going on. You've got mystery cards that you need to think about. You've got mystery cards you need to play yourself.
Yep.
You need to use your army lots and lots of different ways every single turn to try and achieve these objectives. And more often than not, you are getting to the end of the game.
Very close in points.
And it's usually very, very close. So there's a lot of tension, there's a lot of excitement, and I really do think there is actually some very strategic elements that you can't pull off in a normal game of Ninth Edition, because you're not set to a specific set of things to do every single turn. There is randomness, but in my opinion, in some ways it's even harder to do well and achieve those tactical objectives than the normal version.
Yeah, I think it's a different aspect of strategy. So if you're playing your GT missions, you know what your secondaries are in the game, you know what the primary is going to be, that's it. There's no surprises. You know, I'm playing this mission, that's where the objectives are. Yep. That's my deployment zone, that's the secondaries. I'm playing that army, secondary 1, 2, 3, that's it. Your Maelstrom, in both versions, you have to react to the flow of the game. So it's just a different skill set, that's all. Whether it's a more balanced, I mean, here's the thing. Maelstrom is not balanced. We said that at the very beginning. Is 40k balanced? Absolutely not. So anyone that tells you that Maelstrom it's just not balanced enough needs to take a step back, look at 40k as a whole and go, well, this is clearly balanced. It's not. Yeah. Like it's getting better, but it is nowhere near a perfectly balanced game. So it's a bit of a false comparison to make. Is one more unbalanced than the other? Perhaps, but it accounts for different skill sets. And that applies for both. Other little pros that I would say for both as well, and this again comes down to just that different skill set of playing a game and different sort of strategy that you have to think of, is because your deployment maps are random and you place the objectives, every game is different.
Yeah.
Every game is different because it's not one in the center, boom, 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 boom. It's, I'm going to put one there, then you put one there, I put one there. Oh, okay, well, I don't really want to go to the middle, so I'm going to put one in that corner. And you go, well, I want to come at you, so I'm going to go over there. But I don't know my deployment zone yet. So you might get that one and I go, oh, darn, I've got no objectives in my table quarter. It's all gone horribly wrong. So it's different every time. And you can tweak those. That's the beauty. If you want to make it more balanced, you can tweak all of that stuff by going, in this mission, we will do it as 2 of the objectives are already set up and we only place 2. We're always going to use this deployment map in this thing. One of the things that I absolutely adore about it, and this is just an issue that I have with Ninth in general, is I'm allowed to put objectives in terrain again, which is just really nice. Like, because every game of Ninth Edition, the objectives are either behind a barricade or next to something. They're never in something. And I get why. I get why from a balance perspective, because there's going to be some times where you go, I need to go get that objective, but my tank can't get to it because there's a wall there. However, I would argue that if you're relying on that, you're already in trouble.
Yeah.
So it's kind of one of those things, and again, it's to stop you from putting objectives on top of like a 6-floor building, and suddenly no one can get to it other than your unit with fly because I took Eldar, ha 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 ha. So, but things like that you can kind of incorporate and account for, like with all games, by talking to your opponent. So you can kind of go, you can remove that more random element, but that variety that it allows you in terms of your setup and the way that you need to think outside the box is another big pro for me in both versions. But yeah, I think overall, it's a tough one. They both have good aspects.
Yes.
But they also both have bad aspects,
which we'll cover right now. So with pros, there are inevitably some downsides as well. We're going to start off with the new version again, just to keep things in order. So one of the issues I find, we've touched on some of these things briefly already, but one of the things that I find a little bit of a shame with the new one is because the secondaries, they're not secondaries. No, with the missions and tactical objectives, because they are generic, although it's good because you don't have to learn anything new and you know what to expect with each game, it does take away some of the flavor that you did get with the old version of Maelstrom, where you had things that really fit with your army's theme and you sort of did things that you'd expect to see your army do. With this one, it's sort of a list of stuff and then you can pick something. Yeah. To an extent.
But you don't pick it, is the problem. You pick the categories, but even then the categories are random. Now, it's extremely unlikely, but you might pick a category that is around, holding some objectives, right? But because your categories are random every turn, and your objectives within those categories are random every turn, you might never get the objective that gives you 5 points for holding the objective that's next to your deployment zone. Yeah. So you might be like, great. Yeah, and I think that is one of the major downsides, is despite the objectives being quite generic, there's some which are just they're just bad.
Yeah.
They're just like, make 10 models flee in the morale phase.
Some of them are very hard to do for any army.
Kill 20 models in a single phase. Now, some armies you're gonna go, yeah, okay, fine, easy.
Yeah.
But there's others which you just go, well, if I rolled that, because the other 5 objectives in that category were good for me, but I got that one.
Yeah.
It's just a waste of a turn.
Yeah.
It would be like if you're sort of looking at your GT missions, it'd be like turning around and going, right, okay, so on you've picked Abhor the Witch against a Grey Knight player, right? Apart from the fact that you can't score it on turn 3 because reasons. You know, you'd be like, oh, that's a bit awkward.
Yeah.
Like, or something like your Codex Warfare for your Space Marines. Even though that's a specific one, it's one of those ones where you kind of go, yeah, I might pick it and it might be useful, but imagine you had to roll a dice every time in your command phase to go, on a 4+, you're allowed to achieve it. If you don't, you're not allowed to. You have to pick something else. You'd be like, it's really weird, right? It just doesn't... I think the main con for me is it's, ironically, based on what we were just saying in the process, it's too random.
Yeah.
And you have no control over it.
Yeah.
And I think this is the main issue that people had with the original versions of Maelstrom, which was a very similar style of here's one big table and a bunch of dice rolling or card drawing from a big set of options, some of which you just can't do or just don't fit your army or don't fit your opponent. Now, they've offset it a little bit by, sort of things like kill a Psyker. Well, if your opponent doesn't have any Psykers, you get to pick one instead.
Yeah.
So they have allowed for some of it, but then there's others where you can't do it anyway, but because it doesn't fit the criteria of a keyword, you can't swap it out.
There's a very fine line between something being impossible to achieve and therefore you can choose something else, or being near enough impossible.
Yeah.
Because if there is a way of you achieving a secondary objective, you can't replace it with something else.
Yeah.
If there are...
Like you can adjust the table with CP, like you can move it up or down one, or you can set it to 1 on the table instead of the 5 that you rolled, for a CP.
Yeah.
But you have to do all these at the start of the battle round. So it's kind of, if you're going second and you have 0 CP and you're on turn 4, you don't get to do that.
Yeah.
Because you've not regenerated a CP yet.
Yeah.
So it's... there is a massive first turn advantage.
Yeah, big time.
I think for a lot of them, because your opponent also gets to see what you've drawn. So let's say me and you, for example, in the game that we played, you went first. So you could see my objectives every time.
Yeah.
So there was some that you could go, I can't counter that. Fine. But there was a few where you just go, yeah, I moved there. You can't score that point.
There's no way you can do that now.
It's like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
So again, big spoilers if you've not watched it, but you've gotten this far in the video and we've told you multiple times now, this is on you. My last mission, as we've mentioned, was to kill Celestine. But because I drew that before your first turn, you just went, all right, I'll move Celestine away.
I will do something which means you cannot do that.
Yeah. Which is fine. That's not necessarily a bad thing. That's good play. But I have no way of countering yours.
Yeah.
Is the issue.
Yeah.
So
that was one of the really great things about the mystery cards.
Yeah.
Because you could have hidden that card
Yep.
in the old version of Maelstrom.
Yep. Well, in the old version of Maelstrom, I would only put my objectives in play in my turn.
That is
so
also
you
true,
you would do your turn, and then I go, you've fallen into my trap, child.
Yeah.
Bang! And you go, oh no, I've left stuff out in the open to hold this objective, but you've got killed this one that's holding an objective. Damn it!
Yeah, but that goes both ways. Like you can both do that.
Yeah.
And again, it brings back the really cool strategic elements I was talking about before, and also it just makes it way more fun because this random stuff happens.
It's backwards and forwards.
Yeah,
I
and
think,
then although it is random, you then need to think on your feet and then counter that randomness.
Yeah.
To make it work for you.
Yeah, but again, because it's based on a deck building, it's random, but not too random, if that makes sense. Whereas this version, because it's D6, and because, as we've mentioned, you can keep getting the same objective over and over again, it's not like once you've rolled that objective, if you don't achieve it at the end of your turn, because you have to do it at the beginning of each turn regardless, it's not a case of, oh, okay, you rolled this one that's in turn 1, cool, get rid of it now. If you roll it again, pick something up. You don't get to do that You don't get to do that, nor can you go, I rolled that one and I'm not going to achieve it this turn. I might achieve it next turn. You can keep it, but it costs you a CP.
Yes.
Which again, as we've established, if I'm going second and I don't have any CP,
Yeah.
I can't do that.
It's a precious commodity.
Yeah, and even starting with more CP, generally by turn 3, you're down to 1 or 0 CP anyway.
Yeah, for sure.
Because you want to get those big combos off and stuff.
And speaking about mid-game as well, there are examples that we've had, and plenty of examples that I've seen, is that the game can be decided within 3 turns.
Yeah.
Which in a way, like you've said, it's an inherent problem with 9th edition.
Yeah, there can be those times where you get that. I think with the Maelstrom, it's not as bad because you know you've got the opportunity and your opponent might get a really bad score or a bad set of secondaries. But, you know, but again, you kind of, it's almost at that point where you go, but because it's random, I don't know. Because I don't know what I'm going to get in my turn 4 and turn 5, is it, you know, it's just, it's literally leaving it up to Lady Luck, which again, I've mentioned many times before, it's a dice game.
It is.
You know, she is fickle. She is going to look down on your tables from time to time and go, no.
Mainly no for me.
Mainly no for you. But if I had the deck, I know what's in my deck coming into turns 4 and 5. I know whether I'm going to be able to achieve those or not, in theory. So I think the main issue is because you've got to roll for it every time, it's even more random than previously. Because even in the old version of Maelstrom, before Schemes of War, where you had the big table, if you rolled it again, you didn't keep it. If and it also works the other way. Let's say you get one where it's like, I need to kill one of your vehicles. Okay, cool. I get 5 points for killing a vehicle. What do I get next turn? Kill a vehicle. Great.
Yeah.
We may as well be playing Bring It Down at that point.
Yeah.
You know? Yeah. It's just, I could get that every turn against some armies and it just cripples them. Yeah. I might never get that against a guard army with like 8 chimeras and go, great. Yeah. You know, so again, it's that randomness, it's too random, I think, the new version. And the other issue as well is because you have to do it every time, and I know we said at the beginning it's not as bad, it's still quite clunky.
Yes.
Like, you're going to have a bit of paper with a bunch of writing on it in every game.
Yeah, but being able to track all of the points does require a method of doing so.
Yeah.
At least with the old version, if you've got your cards, once you've achieved them and discarded them, you can quite easily note what you've...
Yeah, you just put the cards to one side, you know. So it was... Yeah, so I mean, when we were playing our game, there were a few moments where we were probably spending about 10-15 minutes going, hang on, wait, this point, yep, you got that, yep, you've done that, but you can do it again, so fine, okay. What was that one? What was that one? Okay, you've rolled that. Okay, then because you roll, then I roll, then you roll, then I roll, then I roll, then you. It's just there's a lot going on in between turns. And as we said, once you have done it a few times, it's not that bad. Yeah. But it's still a lot to track.
Yeah, and when the most efficient way of tracking the game is on a spreadsheet, there's something not quite right in terms of how the game's created.
It does feel very clunky, and even when you have done it a few times, like you say, if you're having to use a spreadsheet, it's a bit awkward. Part and parcel of that is because there isn't the card element.
That's part of it being a test game. Yeah,
and that is something that can obviously come, but I think it certainly needs to be a bit more accessible. Another con for me, and then this will be my last con, because the bulk of my issues revolve around the randomness, and I think this is just another issue that I have, not necessarily with Ninth in general, but because the points are 5 points or 8 points, 5 points or 8 points, there's very little granularity in it. So it's just, I got 5, you got 5. I got 5, you got 5. I got 5, you got 8. I got 5, you got 8. I got 8, you got 5. I got 5, you got 0. I got 5, and it's just like, your games are going to be pretty much similar outside of you getting really, really bad scores. But it's almost at that point we go, why is it in 5s and 8s? Why not just make it 1s and 2s?
It is a bit weird.
Like,
I'm presuming there is a reason for it.
I mean, I guess there's a reason for it, but I don't know what. I can't see what that reason is. Yeah. But it's similar to like your GT missions as well. There's times where I look at it and I go, why does this need to be out of 100? It just feels a very arbitrary number. It doesn't feel like it needs to be, but that's, again, it fits with the 9th edition sort of style and theme, so it's not a massive issue, but it's just one of those ones where I look at it and I go, there's going to be times where you do look at it and you go, oh, okay, well, it's turn 3 and you're 15 points ahead. Oh, that's quite a big... It's actually not 15 points, but it feels like a lot.
Yeah.
It feels like you're far more ahead than you actually are, whereas if you've got smaller numbers, it does feel a bit closer. But I mean, that's more of a nitpicky one. I don't know if you've got any other cons on the new version.
Not so much for the new one, no. I think that there's not tons, but I think they are quite substantial. Just for like the overall feel and the fun of the game. Like it's great. It's a game of 40k 9th edition. It's brilliant. And this add-on, excuse me, doesn't feel like it quite brings enough to me for me to want to play that over the normal game of 9th edition. I think that's sort of the overriding factor for me at the moment.
Yeah.
It brings some variety, but I'd say that it's a little bit too clunky and there's not quite enough reward for me to do this over a normal game of 9th edition.
Yeah, it doesn't feel like a strong sort of pick over the other one. Whereas ironically, with the Schemes of War, with sort of towards the end of 8th edition, we enjoy playing Schemes of War far more than the core missions.
Oh yeah, every time.
Because it just offered a lot more than the core missions did. Does this offer more than the sort of your core missions and your GT missions? Yeah, I agree. I'm not sure. I don't think there's enough sort of impact at the end of a game to make me go, oh, that was, you know, a worthy contender to a tightly fought GT mission. It was just kind of it, you know, because you're mentally drained after a game of 40k anyway, oftentimes, you know, depending on the game that you're playing. And to then add on another hour's worth of admin as well,
Yeah.
you're just kind of like, okay.
Let's call it a draw.
Yeah, let's just call it a draw. You know.
Well, before we pass judgment, let's just go over some of the cons for the old Maelstrom, and then we will decide who is the victor. Right, so with Schemes of War, there were inevitably some downsides with it.
Of course.
One of which is that you have to have a deck of cards to play it properly.
Yeah.
That's where one of the downfalls are with the new version, is that it is very clunky. And Schemes of War wasn't clunky because you have the cards, but you kind of have to have them to play properly.
You don't need the cards because you could do like the D66 system, but then you've got to write down the associated numbers that are in your deck, then you've got to cross them off when you've drawn them, and then what if you roll a 1 and a 6, so that's a 16, but you don't have card number 16 in your deck? What do? Do you re-roll it until you get... You could be there for just as long with the old version, if not longer.
Yeah.
Yeah, you need a deck of cards. Now, obviously, if you've got Necrons or Space Marines, soon to be Drukhari at time of filming, you know, or the updated supplements, you don't get those anymore. And this is obviously the other issue, is this is a rule set for 8th edition. You cannot get those rules anymore via official sources.
Yeah.
You know, so it's kind of one of those things where you just go, you're going to have to house rule stuff, even to make it fit the 9th edition format.
Yeah.
Now with the cards, you could buy them if you've got the old armies. You could find them off of eBay for the old armies, but eventually you're just kind of going to be like, well, I mean, half the stuff in here, you know, the stratagems aren't the same, the psychic powers for them aren't the same.
Yep.
So you're buying them for the tactical objectives, which if you're going to play Maelstrom, Schemes of War, 8th edition style, fine.
Cool. Yeah.
But it's also one of those things where you just go, oh, I've just spent nearly 12 quid on 50% of this box, which does nothing.
Yeah.
Or, you know, $200 if you're living in Australia. So, you know, it's kind of one of those things where you just go, it's just awkward. There are ways around it, but there's no like easy solution around it, so to speak. And I think one of the other issues as well, sort of, I kind of touched upon it there, is because it's for 8th edition, we had to house rule a couple of things.
Yeah, it talks about when you're doing the game, it talks about things like Slay the Warlord and Lionbreaker and stuff like that are in play.
Yeah, seizing the initiative.
Seizing the initiative, yeah.
Yeah, so we did actually talk about it in our game, the Sisters and not the Sisters Necrons game.
The one that's coming up.
There's another one that's coming up. The Orcs Talon game.
Yes,
that was the one.
That's the one.
Yeah, so that was using the old Maelstrom rules, and we talk about some of the tweaks that we made to make it work. So we used alternative deployment. One, because I think that's a better way of deploying rather than I deploy my entire army and go first, but unless you seize, you know, based on a 50-50 roll-off, you know. So we alternated because there's more strategic nuance to that.
Yeah.
You know, we you know, used the straight roll-off rather than that. We didn't use the seize. As fun as seize was, it was a bit silly.
Yes.
You know, so we didn't use elements like that. So we kind of made that house rule. One of the ones that we were talking about that we didn't do, and this is another key criticism of Schemes of War and Maelstrom back in the day, was I'm holding 3 objectives. I get D3 victory points. I could get 1, I could get 3. You would just make it 2. If you want to make it balanced, you'd make it 2.
Usually some of those D3s are hard to get.
Yeah.
Doable, very doable.
Yeah.
But would often sort of mean that's where your turn is dedicated to try and really maximize the points. The D3 element sucks.
Yeah, or to the extent of, you know, being a win more button.
Yeah.
So there would be things. So one of them is no prisoners, which was, you know, you get 1 victory point for killing a unit in a turn. Cool. You get D3 points for killing between 3 and 5 units in a turn. Okay. D3 plus 3 for killing 6 or more. If I've killed 6 or more units in a turn in 9th edition, I've probably already won.
Game over.
You know, again, depending on what you're playing. If you're playing against Tau, you get something like that. You go, all those drones.
Yeah.
You know, you come up against Custodies, you're going to be like, if I can kill 1, I'll take a point. And again, that kind of comes down to the deck building element. Would I take that against a Custodies army? Probably not. But it's one of those, you know, domination, D3 plus 3 victory points if you control every objective on the battlefield. There are some armies that can do that on turn 1.
Yeah.
There are some, and I used to do it, the Chef Special, you do that, and you'd be like, boom, there you go. So I just got 5 victory points because I rolled, you know, or I got 6 victory points. You know, your priority orders achieved.
Yeah.
My boy, you know, do something with a warlord, get double the victory points, you know, stuff like that. So there's a few which are inherently random, but they are easy to fix by going, it's D3, you know, Supremacy is a classic. It's you hold 3 or more objectives in a 6 objective game. Pretty easy, right? Especially considering that you've set up 3 of those, so you know where they're going to be in some capacity and the capabilities of your army. So D3 victory points for holding 3. And how many times is it you can look back and you go, I rolled a 1.
Yeah.
For holding 3 objectives.
Yeah.
Just make it 2. You just make it 2. It's easy to house rule, but there's actually a fair bit to house rule to make it fit more with the 9th edition. It's not difficult. It's just, and it's like playing with the cards. It's not difficult, but it will take a little bit of time and tweaking to do. And that's where I think a lot of the issues of the original version did come from in terms of like cons, is that that element of randomness did put a lot of people off, I would say. But it's easy to fix.
Yeah, easy enough. I mean, there's some simple things that we did, us meager humans did in 15 minutes to make it work in 9th edition. It was just a couple of agreements on what we think should replace certain things and how we should deploy and stuff, and it fit in nicely.
It didn't take long, but it was just one of those things you go, once you've done it, you've done it. But it still needs to be done. I think the main issue of it is the accessibility. In our current climate, it's the accessibility of that game mode now.
Yeah.
Because of, as we sort of mentioned, some you know, if you've just bought a Space Marine army and you're really interested in Schemes of War and you go, oh, that sounds really cool. You know, and you joined us in 9th edition, sorry, you're out of luck. You can't get those data cards anymore.
Yeah.
You can find them. And you could potentially use the generic ones from other data cards and sort of tweak them. And I think that's another con. I know we've sort of mentioned it as a pro in terms of the army specific ones. Another big put off for a lot of people was how some of them were just so good.
Yes.
So it was like, one of my favorites was Thousand Suns. For every 2 powers that I cast with Thousand Suns, I get a victory point.
Yeah. Okay.
All right.
It's like say every time you move 2 units, you can have an objective.
Yeah,
victory point.
Yeah, you're playing Eldar, you know, like you move, you know, but then you have the other aspect of it where you go, oh, that's a really fluffy one, but it was like, okay, if you kill a unit in the shooting phase or the fight phase with an Eldar unit, you get a victory point. If you kill a unit in the shooting phase and the fight phase, you get D3 victory points. If you kill a unit in the psychic phase, the shooting phase, and the fight phase, you get D3 plus 3, and you go, it's doable, but it's not easy. And then Thousand Suns are just going,
yeah, magic missiles, and they're like, thank you for my victory points.
So there was a lot of imbalance there, and that's one of the things, you know. So that's a common-ish criticism of some of the secondaries in 9th edition for the army-specific ones. Now remember, we are in that weird limbo stage where we've only got 5 codexes out of like 27. There's more to come. Everyone will be getting those secondaries. Are they balanced? Hey, some are. Some are a lot easier than others. You know, there was one that I saw that was very funny. It was like, I can't wait for the Thousand Suns Codex to come out where they get 3 victory points every time they cast Smite. And I was like, no. But, you know, like even like the Space Marine ones aren't that easy.
No.
But things like Oaths of Moment, you know, it's like, get a victory point for not falling back.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
You know, now some armies you're not going to pick that. You know, White Scars. But I want to fall back.
Yeah.
You know, but it's still one of those where you look at it and you go, that seems pretty easy. You know, so that was always an issue with the Maelstrom then. It's no different to some of the Codex secondaries now. But that's just the sort of thing where you kind of go, if you're going to play Maelstrom, do you go generic or do you go with the army-specific ones? If you do we need to make some tweaks to balance them? Maybe. I mean, really, if you're playing an 8th edition rule set in 9th edition, or 8th edition mission set in 9th edition rule set, you're going to be house ruling stuff anyway, so just carry on house ruling.
Yeah.
So those are some of the major cons with the old version, I think, in comparison to the new version. Having said that, I still think the old version is better.
I do as well. So in summary, I'm of the opinion that Schemes of War was so good, why replace it? I get that they want to put something new and fresh in to have a brand new game, but Schemes of War was a game that was built upon some kind of rocky foundations that ended up being a really solid game system. Like we said before, we wanted to play Schemes of War every single time we made a battle report for you guys. That was our favorite thing to do because it was so much fun, way more entertaining, super dynamic. Every game was different and there was something for everyone. It's great. I think with the new version of Maelstrom, my main point earlier on was that I don't feel like I really want to play that game over the core rules. That may be because the 9th edition core rules are way better than they were in 8th edition.
Oh yeah.
Potentially, and in my opinion they are. But it doesn't offer enough excitement for me to want to do that over a normal game of the core rules or the GT. If we had a 9th edition version of Schemes of War, I'd want to play that way more than
the current version.
The current version.
Yeah, I agree.
It's there's more flavour. It's more exciting. It's a relatively polished system. The cards were fantastic. Just having a deck of cards there that you can just grab and put on the table. Even just that, putting down your 3 cards and your mystery card. Yeah. Like that in of itself was very exciting.
Yeah, it added a layer. And again, it's like I go back to what I've said before. You know, I mean. So to use Magic the Gathering as an example, anyone that says that card games are too random to be competitive, sorry, Magic the Gathering is 10 times bigger than Warhammer 40k. And there's a reason for that, because it's a pretty complex game, but the complexity is in the deck building. Now, will Schemes of War give you that level of complexity? No, of course not. But it's still its own unique strategic thought and process that you have to have. So to say that it's not as balanced or strategic is just, sorry, it's wrong.
Yeah.
It's a different skill set. It's different. Totally.
If you go to your friendly local gaming store and you know you're going to play a made-up version of 9th edition Schemes of War, you've made your list, you put it in your box, you take it to the store, and then you see what you're facing. And you can make your deck, and you can adapt to what's in front of you. You might find that someone's brought the most disgusting list you've ever seen in your life, but because you have this deck where you can change the outcome of the game based on how you play each turn, it doesn't matter what the other person's taking to an extent. it just gives you a whole nother layer of how to play the game.
Yeah.
I personally think it brings a whole new level of strategy that you need to employ to win the game.
Yeah.
And you have to think on your feet far more than you need to in the normal game of 9th edition.
Yeah, and the normal the thing is the normal 9th edition rules I think are super solid. The missions are super solid. They are designed for competitive play.
Yep.
Like you can see that from it's designed to be that way. However, and there's nothing wrong with that because I really do enjoy them. However, there are times where I just go, this is the 18th time I've played this mission and I know the outcome.
Yeah.
I can see the outcome. And if that's what your thing is and you want to push yourself and challenge yourself to like just absolutely smash those missions and do as best as possible, like high score on those missions, if you're going to tournaments, that's the kind of element, that's fantastic because that's how you want to play the game and everyone should play the game the way that they want to. But it's that different skill set, it's a different mindset, it's a challenge to yourself to do something different. Likewise, if you've never played, you know, you look at the GT missions and you go, ugh, competitive play, blah, blah. Give them a go, but vice versa, don't just knock off the Maelstrom missions because, it's Maelstrom, it's random dice rolling in a dice game. You know, you've got to try these things because it will open up a different aspect of the play and a different way of playing the game. However, yeah, the new version just doesn't do it for me because I agree with that sentiment. It's too random.
Yeah.
It's too random and there is very little control over it. The Schemes of War, you have a semblance of control over it via the cards, via you knowing what's in your deck, via you knowing what's coming up. It's no different to writing an army list in that I've built my deck so I know that I can build it to my strengths. Likewise, I've built an army list that I know is going to be built to the GT mission strengths. It's just two different facets of a very similar skill set.
Yeah.
There are ways that you could make the new version work, and I understand why they've done the dice rolling. Mm-hmm. And the reasoning is, like from my perspective, is because they're not going to print off a bunch of cards for the White Dwarf and call it beta, because that's just a waste of cardboard.
Yeah, big time.
So what? And this is the thing: if they do go back to the original Schemes of War, that's what they'll probably do. They'll probably just go, "There's 36 cards in your White Dwarf."
Yep.
Great.
I'll buy a copy.
Right?
I do anyway.
Yeah, I'll buy a couple of copies. So I've got, you know, cards for my mates.
Yeah.
You know, so, you know, it's one of those things, and they'll probably do, you know, because I mean, in the most recent one, they put in a paperback copy of the Munitorum Field Manual.
Yes.
The points.
Which is really cool.
Now you can get that online for free anyway. But now you've got it in a nice little pamphlet. So what they'll probably do if they do go back to that original version, they go, yeah, here's a printable download, you know, sort of copy of it. And then have the little thing at the bottom, you know, like permission granted to copy, you know, to copy and photocopy and use for personal use. Mm-hmm. You know, Games Workshop 2021, you know, sort of copyright, trademark, all that sort of stuff. But they'll probably include some nicer versions in the White Dwarf. Yeah. But then both sides of the game, in terms of your competitive and your non-competitive, now have the option to go, you know what, I'll just give it a go. I'll just print. I missed the White Dwarf, I'll just print them off.
Yeah.
Like, now, obviously, that if they're on paper, they're not as nice to shuffle and things like that, but you can kind of get around that. Again, it's requiring a little bit of outside the box thinking, but the fact that you'll have them available is a nice facet. So that's why they've not done it like that in the White Dwarf, just because it would be a waste of card. Like, they're not going to print off a bunch of cards if it's a beta. But I kind of hope that they just do.
I'd like that. I think doing it in White Dwarf is fine. I kind of like how they're doing that at the moment. With
they did things like that for Bolter Discipline, Shock Assault, all that sort of stuff. They put into beta versions in the White Dwarf.
Yeah. The other way I can see it happening is if they baked it into the app and just have a Maelstrom of War part of the app, and then they have a random card generation in that, and then you've got a digital version as well.
Yeah, that'd be great. You know, you click generate cards, boom, 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 comes up on your screen. Yeah. And then you click on one and it flips it over so you can show your opponent. You're like, bang, there you go, mystery card.
Here's my mystery card, my digital mystery card.
Oh,
yeah,
it's in the cyberspace.
Yeah. So there's a few ways of making it happen.
Yeah.
But I think this is the way to make it happen. Having a game that's different enough from 9th and GT, the core rules and the GT missions, an updated version of Schemes of War for me. And for you,
yes,
is the way to do it, for sure.
Sorry, I just got really distracted by it. This is the way.
This is the way.
This is the way.
We must follow the
follow the creed.
The creed.
So yeah, to finalize, I think the old Schemes of War version was the overall better, more polished version. I think the new version, if they're going to go this way, I just don't think it will be as successful. I don't think it will take off as well. Right. It's definitely got promise. It's just super clunky.
Yeah.
It's just super clunky. There's ways around that they could do that. You know, again, if they did this current version, but they had it on the app and you just went generate, boom, 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 and it gives you your free every time. I'm like, you know what? Fine, because now I've saved 10 minutes of my life every turn not needing to do it. Still need some tweaks in terms of the order that you do stuff, the control that you have over stuff. You know, I think if they were to leave it as is, you would almost have to generate them at the start of each player's turn rather than at the start of the battle round. And you would have to remove doubling up because, you know, imagine if you were playing a GT mission and you took Bring It Down against something that's going to score you 13 points, and you took Deploy Scramblers, which is going to score you 10 points, and then you took, I don't know, Assassinate or something, which is going to score you 10 points, or 12 points rather. And you go, right, okay. And then let's say halfway through the game, you've got a 1 CP stratagem that allows you to go change out your secondary and double up on another secondary. And you go, okay, well, I'll do it for Bring It Down, which I've already maxed out my point. I've already scored 13 points for that. I'll just have another 13 points.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah. What?
You know, it just wouldn't work, right? So they would need to remove that aspect. They would need to refine the generation of stuff. But realistically, just give us back old version. I think that's my conclusion. Just give me back the old version.
And it's down to us. So not
clearly,
us.
yeah.
The royal us. Games Workshop have said in that copy of White Dwarf, this is going to be based on feedback. So if you share our sentiment, if you've played the old version of Maelstrom and you want Schemes of War back, you just ping them an email.
Yeah.
And say, listen here, Games Workshop. I demand Schemes of War. Give me my cards in White Dwarf.
Yeah.
Yours sincerely, Jeff Gamer Esquire.
Jeff Gamer Esquire Jr.
Yeah, exactly.
The Right Honourable.
Yeah. But we would be very interested to hear your thoughts as well.
Yes.
Leave us a comment below. Let us know what you think is going to be the best way of doing it. If you like the new version, if you have opinions on the old version, what do you think should be the true crowned hero champion of the other game of 9th edition, which is yet to be named? Can you tell us what it is? That was a very weird sentence.
Yeah, I don't know where you were going with that.
No, part of my brain fell out my ear. So with that, we're going to move on. Thank you all for being with us here today. Have a little discussion in the comments, and we'll have to see where this journey leads us with Maelstrom of War. We'll catch you next time.
Back to Schemes of War. That's where the journey will lead us.
The old version.
Positivity.
Follow the path.
This is the way.
Magic missiles!